Today we're talking about something that every business, no matter how big, small, or legendary, eventually faces. If you don't evolve, you disappear. It's not about how iconic you are, how dominant you were, or how much capital you once had. In a world moving this fast, history doesn't protect you. The innovation is the only insurance policy left. And to show you exactly what that means, we're diving into one of the most fascinating business stories of the last 2 decades, TomTom. Once, TomTom wasn't another tech company, it was the tech company. If you drove anywhere in the early 2000s, there's a good chance you had a small black and silver device clipped to your windshield, a calm robotic voice guiding you through the streets. TomTom was the Apple of navigation, the Google Maps before Google Maps even existed. It was the king of GPS. But today, that empire barely exists in the way that it used to. This story isn't about a product, it's about evolution. It's about what happens when a brand builds something brilliant and then stops listening to how the world is changing around it. And here's the key idea for you. Whether you're running a startup, a creative brand, or a billion-dollar company at this, every business faces the same 3 threats: complacency, disruption, and misalignment. TomTom just experienced all 3 in real time. So in this session, we're going to unpack that. We'll look at how TomTom built dominance from nothing, how they missed the wave that then replaced them, and more importantly, what we can all learn from that to make sure that we don't fall into the same trap. Because this isn't just TomTom's story, it's a mirror for every brand that thinks that what got us here is what's going to keep us here. So let's start where every success story begins, with a breakthrough. Stage 1. The rise, when innovation meets timing. To understand what TomTom got wrong, we first have to understand what they actually got right. When TomTom launched in 1991, the world was different. The world was very different. Navigation was a luxury, it wasn't a given. If you wanted to find your way, you used a map, like a physical map, or you got lost. TomTom saw a future where direction could actually be automated. They didn't invent GPS by any means, but they commercialized it. They made it accessible, sleek, and simple enough for everyone to use. By 2004, TomTom's devices were literally everywhere. They were in millions of cars on every store shelf and quickly became one of Europe's fastest growing tech companies. Their stock soared, their devices became Christmas gifts, and their ads promised never get lost again. This was their golden era. And here's what's fascinating. See, TomTom didn't win because of the best technology. They won because they understood consumer timing. They realized people were overwhelmed by complexity. They built something that then simplified life. That's always how innovation starts. Not by making things necessarily more advanced, but by making them more usable. So the takeaway here, if you want to build something that lasts, don't chase sophistication. Chase simplicity that solves an actual real pain point. But there's another piece to this puzzle. See, success creates momentum and momentum creates blindness. What we mean by that is, at the end of the 2000s, TomTom wasn't just a company anymore. It was an identity in and of itself. Inside their offices, success felt permanent. But the world outside them was already shifting. Because while TomTom was perfecting its next generation of GPS units, Apple and Google were working on something entirely different, turning the phone that sits in your pocket into your navigation system. And that single shift from device to app would rewrite the rules of an entire industry. So that's where our next stage begins. Stage 2 is the disruption, when the world changes faster than you do yourself. See, when iPhone launched in 2007, the ground literally moved under TomTom's feet. But they didn't feel the tremor right away. See, at first, smartphones were clunky. Internet access was slow, and apps were pretty primitive. TomTom executives looked at them and thought, we're safe. People will always prefer a professional-grade GPS. But within 2 years, that confidence became denial. Because Google Maps arrived, Apple started pre-installing navigation software on every iPhone. And suddenly, what TomTom sold for $300, people could literally now get for free on a device that they had anyway. And that's the moment where most brands fail. Not when competition appears, but when they refuse to believe the competition matters. TomTom's reaction was classic. They kept improving the product instead of improving the model. BlackBerry kind of did the same thing when Apple came on the scene with the iPhone in the first place. Better screens, clearer voices, longer battery life, all for a device that fewer people were needing over time. See, TomTom weren't evolving, they were defending. And this is the lesson for any brand watching this. Innovation doesn't just mean building something new, it means destroying something old. Usually your own product, before someone else does. Because every major disruption in history comes disguised as something small, inconvenient, or often unprofitable. Smartphones were expensive toys before they became actual life essentials. Netflix was a DVD rental site before it became streaming. Airbnb was a couch surfing idea before it became a $1 trillion ecosystem. TomTom saw smartphones as toys. And by the time they realized the truth, it was ultimately too late. Now, to their credit, they tried to adapt. They released mobile apps, licensing deals, partnerships with car manufacturers, but the DNA for the company was still built for hardware. They were playing catch up in a software world. So the lesson here is simple but brutal. You can't out-execute a paradigm shift. If the world changes its rules and you're still playing the old game, even if you are playing it better than anyone else, you're still gonna lose. And this leads us to the next lesson, how legacy becomes a liability. So stage 3 is the trap of legacy. By 2010, TomTom's biggest advantage, its hardware infrastructure, became its biggest weight. Factories, suppliers, contractors, distribution chains, all optimized for physical product. That's great when your world is stable, but in this digital era, the very systems that make you efficient can ultimately make you rigid. And rigidity is what kills speed. See, every decision had to go through layers. Every pivot required paperwork. Every innovation was filtered through old systems that weren't built for agility. Meanwhile, Google was pushing code updates every week. Apple was integrating maps into the iOS ecosystem at scale. TomTom, on the other hand, was still thinking in product cycles, annual updates, quarterly launches, fixed roadmaps. That's the difference between old and new companies. Old companies plan and new companies are adapting. The lesson here is like, when you build something that works, don't just scale it, future-proof it. Ask, if the world changed tomorrow, could we adapt without tearing everything down? And the truth is that most brands can't. See, legacy is comfortable, but comfort is the slowest death there is. Which brings us to the 4th stage here, the part of TomTom's story that's rarely talked about, their attempt to reinvent. So stage 4, reinvention, when brands try to find a second life. And sometimes it works. See, when TomTom realized their old business model couldn't survive, they did try to evolve. They pivoted from consumer GPS to software, selling mapping data to companies like Uber, Apple, and automotive manufacturers. They started licensing their technology instead of selling it direct to consumers. And honestly, that move saved them from complete extinction. It was smart, but it wasn't fast enough to recapture the dominance that they once had. Because here's the truth, reinvention isn't just about doing something new. It's about doing it before you're forced to. And TomTom reinvented under pressure, not from vision. See, that's where most brands ultimately go wrong. If you reinvent and start that after your marketing has kind of already collapsed, or is at least collapsing, it's probably already too late. So what can brands learn from this today? Well, start evolving while you're still winning. Question your assumptions whilst you're still growing. Experiment while you still have the resources to fail safely. Because reinvention done in desperation feels like survival, but reinvention done in anticipation feels like leadership. And that's why Apple, Amazon, Tesla, they're still ahead. Not because they avoid failure, but because they cannibalize their own success on purpose. So if the 4 stages have been about understanding decline, this next one is about transformation. The mindset shift that separates brands that fail from brands that last. So stage 5, the evolution mindset. This is where the real takeaway lives. In business, evolution isn't optional. It's the only constant. And yet most founders and executives resist it because it threatens what they know. And here's what we learned from TomTom. You can't protect relevance by defending your past. You protect it by questioning your future. The brands that survive are the ones that see disruption not as a threat, but as a test of adaptability, a test of humility, a test of how deeply they understand their consumers. Not just what they buy today, but what they'll want next year. So let's talk about how you can apply that. If you stay close to the signal, talk to your customers constantly, their pain points, their roadmap, that becomes your roadmap. Watch for cultural shifts. Most disruption doesn't start in data. It starts in behaviors. And then build teams that experiment without fear, because the next big win usually starts as a small side project. And finally, have the courage to let go of what no longer works, even if it is what made you successful in the first place. That's the mindset that turns decline into evolution. Because if TomTom's story teaches us anything, it's this. You don't lose because you stop being good. You lose because the world stops needing what you're good at. And that's why evolution isn't just a strategy, it is survival. Every brand faces a moment of truth. That instant where momentum turns into memory. And in that moment, you only have two choices: evolve or expire. TomTom's story isn't a tragedy, it's a timeline. It shows what happens when brilliance meets inertia. And if you're building anything today, a business, a product, a personal brand, the lesson is clear. You can't build the future if you're still defending the past. Because technology won't wait, markets won't pause, and customers just won't stay loyal out of nostalgia alone. The only constant advantage you have is your ability to change faster than the world expects. The real question isn't whether your idea is good enough. It's whether your brand is adaptable enough. Because in this era, evolution isn't the reward for survival, it is the requirement for